Thank you, Carolyn. I particularly like the way Carolyn did talk about data as motivational. I think that that's an interesting way to look at it, and I think it's a great way to look at it. I think, you know, the comments she made about the importance, too, of us all working together. Obviously, individually, we need to look at our organizations and the kind of data we need to collect in terms of our own effectiveness, efficiency, our impact. But again, looking at those larger community indicators and where we're trying to move is also important, that collaborative effort. So Carolyn, thank you for those great comments, and I'm sure they'll stimulate other thinking and questions. I would like to invite our panelists up here now to join Carolyn and me. While they're coming up, I remind you that we'd like to hear from you during this portion of the program. So if you have questions for the panelists, please write them down on the index cards that we gave you when you were coming in, and members of our team, folks will be around to pick them up. Again, I also want to remind you about the list of data resources that you'll find on our websites, because I do think that, you know, those of you who are trying to figure out what you need to collect and where some of that information might be, I think that will be a very, very valuable resource. So, I'm going to introduce our panel members one by one from your left, and we're going to ask each of them to make about a 2-minute, give about 2 minutes of comment, sort of an overview of their thoughts on using data and why they think it's important for their organizations. So we're going to start with Rhonda. And Rhonda Gray is the Executive Director of Almost Home, which provides transitional housing for homeless teenage mothers and their children. Previously, she worked as a community investment manager at the United Way of Greater St. Louis and has served as a consultant with an organization that partnered with the St. Louis Public Schools to improve the quality of education for students in St. Louis. So Rhonda, thank you for being here, and we're happy to hear your comments.
Great. I'm on now. Okay, I have to say this. I think this metaphor of diving into data is really appropriate, because when I came on as executive director of Almost Home 3.5 years ago, I knew how very important data was. I had heard, at least, and I really felt like that was something I wanted to focus on, and I dove right in. And it didn't take me very long to realize that I can't swim, so I thrashed about for about a year or so, and we had the great fortune of becoming a Deaconess Foundation Impact Partner, and so I was able to get some additional resources and a rock star lifeguard in the way of EMD Consulting and Sarah Buick, who has been working with us to really navigate this whole data landscape. But I will say this, because when I come to the Rome Group's event, which I have every year, I always want to leave with something actionable and practical. So I first want to say to the EDs and CEOs out there, if you are considering this, if you know it's important, to work with data, you can't just date data, okay? It's the marriage. You gotta be fully committed to this thing. And you gotta be committed in the way of ensuring that you have buy-in from your staff. You have to be committed to creating a culture of performance management. You have to be committed to dedicating a person or persons who will spearhead these efforts and who you will allow the time to do it properly. And then more importantly, you got to keep asking yourselves the important questions. The first of which is, what does success look like for your organization? What impact are you actually trying to have? I think Carolyn spoke to that in her talk. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Because I was a little reluctant, because I thought data wasn't sexy enough. It's too hard. You know, I'm like, we're dealing with people. I know that's what you guys are thinking. But just remember, it's a combination. So the data informs, but stories compel. So what story are you trying to tell, and allow the data to support that? And I think that's going to be a much more meaningful work that you'll be able to provide and services you'll be able to provide to clients. And then the funders will be much more pleased in terms of the impact you're having.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Next, we're going to hear from Chris Ramsey. Chris is the Senior Vice President of Development at the Wyman Center, a national nonprofit that enables teens from low-income environments to develop strong leaderships and social and emotional learning skills. She's played a really integral part in using data to develop strategic partnerships and strong relationships, securing over $25 million and nearly doubling Wyman's annual fund. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Now, is my mic on? Because, okay, good.
Yeah, in fairness, Chris has been suffering from laryngitis from the past 2 years, so, past 2 years. A couple days. So, wow.
That's great.
Felt like years, yeah.
So I think a common theme that we've heard kind of this morning is that we really pay attention to what we measure. And if we think about that, when we started looking at how can we really use data to drive our fundraising efforts, we needed to have a really clear understanding of where we were at that point, and establish those baselines. And that's exactly what we did. We began looking at how much money we were raising, what are the channels those are coming through, and those types of questions. But a really critical question, and I think this goes back to some things Carolyn was saying, was we really needed to look at return on investment, and how were the human resources and the financial resources that we were putting against securing different streams of income coming back to the organization, because it's our job as stewards of that money to make sure that we're doing the best possible work for the young people that we serve. So that's really where we started. And as you can imagine, at that place, things begin to get really objective and a little bit scary, because it's just there and it gets uncomfortable. And we just had to own that. Where are we? You have to own that. And then we could figure out where we needed to go. And for us, I know this is going to be shocking, two broad categories: donors and dollars. Not brain surgery, obviously. But we looked at a lot of different questions within those areas to drive the work that we were doing. One example within dollars for us is really our pipeline, and how is that supporting what we need to do to support the mission and the strategic direction of the organization. So we asked ourselves questions like, very basically, are we asking enough people for enough money to hit the goal? And then at a little bit of a deeper level, how are we doing as an organization, as development officers, in really assessing the probability of those gifts? It's really easy to say we're going to go out and ask 100 people for $10,000. Well, if those people probably aren't going to give you $10,000, that has a completely different impact on how you're projecting towards your goals. So we really looked at all of that, and then it was critical for us to figure out, well, how do we, if we have this data, how are we using it in a way that makes sense to us and helps drive strategy? And that's where we began to develop some tools that we've all talked about today, that allow us to see at any point in time, where are we? Where are we projecting to be? What does our pipeline look like? But even beyond that, it allows us to have the confidence to forecast to the organization where we're going to be, and really not just drive fundraising strategy, but overall organizational strategy and how we're fitting into that mission. In donors, some of the same things around retention and around recovery and acquisition, but really, not only did we look internally, we also looked externally to find out what those best practices are. So if top-tier organizations are retaining 46 to 60% of their donors a year, where did we fall on that? And in 2012, we were a little behind. We were at about 45% in our retention goals. But we paid attention to it, we set strategy, and in 2013, we were able to up that by 5% to 50%. So those are just some ways that we were able to do that. So to Rhonda's point about takeaways, I think you have to really figure out where you're at, and not just figure out where you're at, but own it. Figure out where you need to go in terms of supporting your organization's strategic direction, and then finally, really coming up with the data and tools that are meaningful to your organization, and then probably the most critical piece is to actually use them.
Great, thank you, Chris. Now we're going to hear from Melinda McElhaney, who is the program director for Lutheran Foundation of St. Louis, which provides approximately $4.5 million in grant awards this year. She also provides administrative oversight of the foundation's sister agency, Send Me St. Louis, which helps build capacity in area churches and faith-based organizations. Melinda has a passion for both volunteerism and the use of data and outcomes to help deliver effective programs and services. Welcome, Melinda.
Good morning. All right, now I got to ask, am I on yet? All right, okay, good. I'm a preacher's kid, so I could probably project and still hurt your ears, so I'll try not to do that. But good morning. Gosh, I feel kind of like I got nothing more to add. There's been some great information shared already this morning, so let me see if I can at least provide a little bit of perspective from a funder. One of my favorite quotes is from Andy Stanley in his book called The Purpose of the Path, and in it he says, "Direction, not good intentions, determines my ultimate destination." Now, he was ultimately talking about spiritual health in that quote, but I have totally repurposed that quote and believe that it completely and really does apply to organizational health. In these days and times, wanting to do good just simply is no longer good enough. It's really, we need to know what need to know that what we're actually doing is making a positive difference in the community. A little over 6 years ago, Lutheran Foundation started thinking and acting differently when it came to data and outcomes, and using that to become more strategic in how we did our grant funding and our investments into the community. And I'd like to say that during those 6 years that in dealing with data and outcomes that we figured it out, but we haven't. Sometimes I feel that we're just barely scratching the surface in our own understanding of what this means, both to ourselves as an organization, as a funder, but also to the organizations that we fund and what that means and the difference that they're making in the community. After wading through a ton of data, though, for these past 6 years, I've come to learn that data is not hard to collect. There is data everywhere, and we could be collecting data until the cows come home and still have more data to collect. And we can also analyze and slice and dice that data in 50 gajillion different ways. To me, what I've come to learn is that what it's harder to determine is what our data our organization actually should even collect. And that leads us to the questions of what and why. What, meaning, what is it that I want to know? What does success actually look like in my context? And then the why questions. Why do I want to know that? And why do I think that indicates success? But that's not all. Once I go through the agony of answering those couple of important questions and then go into and collecting the data, which in and of itself is arduous, I will admit that. Once we have that data, I have to then ask, what does this data mean? What does it mean to our organization? But then I'm still not done. I then have to finally have the courage that once I've taken a look at that data, ask what it means, and had some very thoughtful internal discussions about that, to be able to have the courage to sometimes potentially go down a different path, to change my programming, or to make significant changes within my organization in light of that data. Simply spitting out a lot of numbers may make us look really impressive at cocktail parties, but really if we really don't understand and collect the right data, it's really not going to help us anywhere, and it, unfortunately we may end up doing harm to the very people that we're trying to help. So good data ultimately helps me know if I'm making a difference. And that starts with asking the right questions. And really, honestly, that's what Lutheran Foundation is right now. We've been collecting data. We have lots of data. Sometimes I've felt that we've been overflowing with data. And we've done, I think, a good job at least starting to ask, what does this data mean? But we're now starting to realize and question, are we even asking the right questions? And that's where we are right now, is rethinking what are those questions we should be even asking ourselves and those that we fund. And I want to give a shout out because we did take a bold step as an organization and actually hired an evaluation rock star about 6 weeks ago, Sarah Buick, who is now, Sarah, raise your hand, I don't know where you are. There you are. And it's exciting to have her on board because she's going to help us really become even more laser focused on really understanding who we are as an organization and the path that we're trying to go down.
Great. Thank you, Melinda. Thank you. And last but not least, Charles Gasper. Charles is Director of Evaluation for the Nine Network. He's responsible for evaluating the impact of the Nine Network and its partners in the communities they serve. Prior to joining the Nine Network, he was Director of Evaluation for the Missouri Foundation for Health, where he oversaw approximately $3 million in evaluation contracts and served as the internal evaluator for the foundation's programming. So Charles, thanks for being here, and take it away.
Well, thank you all. I just want to say I feel like I'm going to cry because I'm so excited to see so many people that are interested in data. That being said, we've had some wonderful discussion here, some great things shared, and I've been kind of asked to think about this from a community perspective. But I'm also going to bring it back down to the agency perspective as well. I'm going to give you guys a little exercise, actually. When you think about something, when you think about your impact, what's your source of truth? What do you believe in? What do the people who are your key stakeholders believe in? Okay, now take that and magnify that to a community. What do they believe in? What are their sources of truth? What is their measure of trust? That's what we deal with at Nine, literally on a daily basis. And if you work within the community, you do as well. I also want you to think about collaboration. How many of you guys collaborate right now? This is actually an iterative exercise. So a majority of you actually collaborate. Let's do an exercise on that as well. Are those collaborations really effective? Are you getting as an agency what you need out of those relationships? Are your stakeholders, the people you serve, best served by those alliances? These are things that data should support. And so the reason why I'm asking you to think about this is, as we've heard, data is everywhere. It exists everywhere. You could not go 2 feet without stumbling over it. I collected data just now with having you guys raise your hands. Okay? It's everywhere. What you need to do is think about what are the key critical things that you want to affect. We've also heard the notion of performance management. Evaluation or data should not just be about the end impact of the summative of all your work, but rather should be part of your programming, should be part of what you're doing to affect change. When I first started 20 years in this role, I thought, I'm a researcher, I'm going to kick back, I'm going to watch, I'm going to see what happens. I considered myself a part of our program team within Nine, and I consider myself part of the program team on any collaborative we work on. Data should be an integral part of that as you work through things. So again, the key things I want you to think about as you leave today: what are your sources of truth? What do you trust? And incidentally, it doesn't have to be a random controlled trial. It could be a group of community members putting sticky dots on a wall and saying, this is what's important to us. Second, when we're thinking about community, think about those alliances. Think about why you're doing it. And then use data to support those questions, not the other way around. So don't just dive into data and hope to find something. Think about what you want to achieve, think about the processes you're doing, and then find the data to support it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So if people have other questions, again, you can continue to provide them. We've got I've got quite a few here that I'm weeding through. There are several related to programs, so maybe we can focus a little bit on a couple of these. The questions really relate to sort of what's the best way to start thinking about collecting program data if you're looking to, again, make sure that you're being as effective and efficient, having the kind of impact that you want. So, Rhonda, you have any suggestions about that? And then anybody else on the panel as well?
So you said the best way to start?
Yeah, you know, what do you need to really be thinking about?
Right, so for us, what I've learned is before you even start this process, there's some preliminary work and some planning that you really have to do if you want to make your data collection and analysis efforts really meaningful? First of all, have you articulated your agency's theory of change and have a clear logic model, right? Have you defined what success looks like for your clients, and do you have those meaningful indicators and milestones of progress and of success? And so you really kind of got to do some background planning and work before, I think it speaks to what Charles mentioned, is you kind of got to begin with the end in mind. You need to know what it is you're going to use this data for and how you will use it to support your story, your work, the impact that you're trying to have on the community. But before you even can collect the data, you have to define clearly what that is. So from a program standpoint, you got to get the right folks around the table. And sometimes it's not just your program people, right? Because they are so immersed in it from day to day, they often are blinded by what they think they should be seeing. And rather than asking and answering those hard questions of how you really can envision success for your clients, what will they, how will they be acting, what will they be saying, what will they be thinking, how will the community be different as a result of your work? So then you go about identifying those data points that you want to collect that are going to support that particular argument. So I would say start with a real solid, concrete plan that outlines program theory of change, the outcomes, and what it is you are trying to accomplish.
Anybody else want to add anything?
I'll share. Become a 5-year-old. Keep asking why. Why am I doing this? So not only from the standpoint of program design, but then why am I collecting the data I'm collecting? How many organizations here collect demographic data on your people? How many of you actually use it? Okay, about half of those that said they collect it actually use it. Okay, that's the most common thing I see in a survey, right? If you don't use it, why are you collecting it? There's a lot of other data that we collect because we think there might be something that is out there and that we're hoping might work out. And so we collect it. And we put ourselves through a lot of extra effort that we really don't need to. One other thing I'll share with you is, how many of you folks have heard this concept of developmental evaluation? Okay, this is a new thing that's coming. A lot of the evaluation, we're like, yeah, I've heard it. This is the next thing that's coming. Oh my.
Yeah, really. And the horses are here.
Whoa, okay. So, it's coming down the pike. Again, even with that, people say with developmental evaluation, outcomes emerge, they come. However, you still need to stay focused on what the core pieces are of your program first, and then let the outside stuff, the stuff that you didn't expect, the stuff that will emerge, come. And then you can add it. But you don't want to just create data systems to collect data as a shotgun. You kind of reach out and hope to find. Because if you do, you're really going to miss the core pieces of what your programs are all about.
Here's an interesting question, I think, because it asks about how you can change an organization's culture to value data. In other words, how can you sell, if you will, that kind of performance culture and data use to employees throughout the organization, particularly management. So let's say maybe program people or fundraising people appreciate it, or others in your organization, but the culture's not there. So what our panelists say to that? Melinda?
Culture is hard and exhausting. And it's something I think if you don't have this culture within your organization today, don't think that you're going to have it 6 months from now or even 2 years from now. Culture change to really go from beginning to end, to have it fully embedded, that this is part of our DNA and this is how we define ourselves as an organization, takes 5 years. So first, go into it knowing that we're going to be at this for a long time. We're going to be at it forever, because once you get it embedded, you don't just go, hip, hip, hooray, we're done. This now becomes who you are. I think, Did any of us get into this field because we wanted the fame and the money? No, why did we get Charles accepted. We got into it because we wanted to make a difference. We saw a need in the world. We wanted to, when we were young, we wanted to change the world. Now that we're older, that we've been beaten down, maybe we just want to change a little corner of our world. But we still want to change something, and we're passionate about that. And if that's that's the end that we start with. What Rhonda said, where is it? Why do we do what we do? And start having those conversations across the board in the organization. Start at the board level, at the executive level, but don't leave out the line staff, because they're ultimately going to be the ones that will be charged with having to collect this data. And if they don't understand, if they don't agree, you're not going to get the data. And you're not going to get it as richly as you want, and you're not going to be able to make change. So part of it is just start having those simple conversations. Why do we do what we do? What's the change we want to see happen? That's the end goal. And then say, did you know we just named an outcome? Right. How easy is that? And you backtrack from there, but you start with conversations, and you start with small wins. If you're an organization that has multiple programs, maybe you start with one program and start to see the difference, and that by focusing on outcome metrics and data and being driven by the end, how that makes that program more vibrant, more rich, more attractive to outside donors, how your staff get excited. And then the other staff start going, well, how can we do that? But ultimately you have to understand it's not going to happen overnight, and you have to keep at it. You need to have an evangelist within your organization who will champion this and keep talking about it and be excited, and for it to come, again, not only from the top down, but it also has to emanate from the bottom up, and your line staff are just important to speaking into it as your executive and board level staff are.
And I would just add to that too, I think a really critical part of that is helping your organization and team members within your organization understand how collecting that data can really help them do their jobs.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it makes it easier.
Yep.
They
may be able to take 5 things off of their plate because you
Right.
figure out we don't really need to do those 5 things because they're not really helping us achieve the
Right.
outcomes. So,
Right.
woohoo!
Right. Or, when you're asked for reports or you're asked to provide stuff, you're already collecting that data in a meaningful way that then can be shared throughout the organization, up through the board, et cetera. So I think once folks see how that can really enhance and give them time to do really the important work that's getting the return, setting up those systems isn't always fun, but there is that great outcome.
And the other piece that you both referenced is this notion of disseminating the information back through the organization. Get everybody engaged. Let them understand why this is meaningful. So often, this data gets put into a nice thick binder and put away. And maybe the CEO reads the first 2 pages and nothing else is read. So the other critical piece besides that is make it report it in a way that people can use it.
Well, it's building in at least once annually an opportunity for your staff to sit down and, as I said before, really critically think, what does this mean? Data is data. It's neither good nor bad, very honestly. And you can slice and dice it a ton of different ways. But it only becomes meaningful when you ask that question, what does this mean? And really spend time and have those conversations across all levels of the organization. Otherwise, it gets filed away, you report it out to us big, ugly funders that because we've made you do it. It's not for us. It's really not for us. Well, it is a little bit for us, but really it's not. At the end of the day, it really should be for you because it's helping you determine, are you changing your little slice of the world?
So let's continue that conversation on the funder side a little bit, because there's a question here that I think is probably on the minds of a lot of you. We saw some mixed results in terms of whether funders will support evaluation or data collection kinds of things. So maybe Carolyn, you can speak to that a little bit, and Melinda. What is going to be important for nonprofits to address, to talk about as they might approach donors for support for their data collection efforts?
We actually do support, kind of a general topic is one-time non-recurring expenses, and that has a tangible outcome that the nonprofit is trying to accomplish and achieve. What's the difference that that one-time non-recurring expense is going to make? And so evaluation and technology and data gathering is a really critical component of, everyone I think is so articulate. This is just a great panel that's provided some wonderful perspectives. But again, how the impact and the outcomes of your organization connect to the needs and the challenges in the community, I think are critical, and the world is changing. I really feel like there's a fluidity of capital, and the evaluation and the data and the impact and the outcomes that you all understand that your organizations are accomplishing are critical for keeping the capital in this community, because it is more fluid now than it ever has been. And that's why I really think that the research is critical. So we do support evaluation, but again, it needs to be informed by, many of the ways that the panelists here, the experts right here in your community have talked about how they use and what they need to evaluate programs. We would need to see that in the proposal where you're saying we need to do this. So it wouldn't be funding to just collect data or to collect metrics. It's how are you going to use that to improve your organization? Everyone is being asked to do more with not just the same amount of money, but less. And are there ways that this funding is going to help you accomplish that and accomplish more than you have maybe accomplished in the past?
Could I ask you both a question related to that? Carolyn, you mentioned this idea that foundation boards and funders are being held more accountable externally for their own work. How is that affecting how foundations may look at funding evaluative work down the line?
I think you just answered the question. It is.
Yes, again.
Charles is like God.
You speak.
There you go. Thunder. You okay up there, guys?
I think you've brought up a really good point. It is, I'm serious. Foundation directors are asking, and this is across the country, want to know that their resources, regardless of the size of the funding that they have available, what difference is that making? And not just individual grants, which is one thing that, we have a subcommittee of our board that looks at a one-year report from every nonprofit that receives $25,000 or more. What was the impact of that contribution? Did you accomplish the goals and the outcomes that you wanted to accomplish? But then broader than that, so that's about each individual grant, but then broader than that, we have focus areas for our grant making. And are we making a difference in that sector, in that issue? And that's one of the reasons why I talked about coalitions and collaboration, is because there is no, Bill and Melinda Gates, they have more money than, I don't even know how to describe how much money they have, but they they have, they're really interested in how they are making an impact, but they aren't solving the issues that they're working on either. I mean, they're moving the ball forward, they're having an impact, clearly, but it's working together with others that I think really does make the biggest difference. So it's both, how does your individual grant, I mean, our board is saying we want reports, we want outcomes, we want impact, we want to understand what did we help you do, and then broader, what are the issues and the challenges in the community that we are going to focus our grant-making dollars on, and we've got to be clearer and clearer about that.
Thank you.
Let's see. Ditto, first. I would say when it comes to funding evaluation, first off, I feel like I need to make the disclaimer that when you talk to one funder or meet one funder, you've met one funder. We all look at the world through slightly different lenses. So I'll talk to you about how Lutheran Foundation of St. Louis sees the world as it relates to evaluation and outcomes. We're willing to fund evaluation activities, and we have funded that, and that's ranged from the staff time it takes to collect the data. We recognize that there is an expense when it comes to evaluation if you're doing it thoughtfully and intentionally. So we do fund that. We funded databases to help collect the data. We funded the diagnostic tools to help you gather the information from the individual clients. And so over the years, we have invested some dollars into helping organizations do that. We've even invested in helping organizations put it, work with an outside consultant to put in an evaluation process. What I think we're becoming a little bit more disquieted about when it comes to funding evaluation is sometimes in a grant application, it feels like it's a budget plug. That they'll say, well, we just need $2,000 for evaluation, but not really have a lot of definition as to exactly what that means. It kind of feels like that's just kind of $2,000, it's a throwaway, might not be the right term, but just kind of plug that money in there. And so while we're interested in funding evaluation, we want to really understand what is that going towards. Just as if you want funding to hire a case manager, we want to understand what that case manager is going to do. We then also want to understand if you want $2,000 for evaluation or $10,000 for evaluation, what exactly will that be doing, either one-time expenses or ongoing, to help your organization really fully understand. And then we tie that to, then what are you going to do, again, with that knowledge, with that data, and to help inform your future practices. I think having been at Lutheran Foundation for over 8 years now, I have seen our board become more sophisticated and focused on not just this particular project and the feel-good component and how many people are going to be served, but much, much more focused as the years have gone by on what are the outcomes. What's the difference that this individual grant is going to make, but then also interested in and we also have focus areas, what difference are we making in this focus area? We know that our money is just a drop in the bucket when it comes to even working within a certain sector, but are we seeing the needle move at all? And that, how are we using that to inform our future operations? In our new strategic plan that we just launched at the beginning of this year, when our board, a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, started the strategic planning process, we went back and used the data that we'd been collecting to inform where we should go next. And one of the reasons we decided to drop one of our focus areas was through the collection of that data and the belief that that was not as tied closely to our vision and mission and who we were as an organization as the other areas. And so our board does take it more and more seriously. I think that's driven somewhat by staff. We're becoming more sophisticated with the information we're even sharing with them, but they themselves are starting to learn the lingo and what questions to ask and what they're interested in seeing, and again, much more focused on what's the difference being made by those that we're funding.
Mm-hmm. Great. An interesting question here about what about nonprofits that are working in the policy change or policy arena? What's the best way to think about evaluation for those groups? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
So this is something that actually I considered a lot, actually, in my previous role as Director of Evaluation for Missouri Foundation for Health. How does policy change? How is policy effective? Certainly nonprofits do a lot of work to affect change within their communities at a more civic level. I guess, again, it boils down to developing an aspect, at least from my perspective, of a theory of change. Oftentimes when we think about policy, we think about, did this vote occur, or did this shift specifically occur? Well, there are a lot of steps along the way to get you there. Some of them are very clear, and you can articulate them very well at the front end. Remember when I mentioned developmental evaluation is coming? It's also having those feelers out there to assess what's the landscape today. So it's not a one and done and we're done, but we know that policy change is iterative. And so as you are managing that environment, as you're affecting the changes that you're trying to affect in that environment, as you're trying to educate certain key individuals within the community, you should be effectively evaluating those shifts. Are we tipping the right people? Are we moving them in the right direction? Are we getting the right message out there? So I would say it's a two-piece process of, again, identifying at the beginning, what is our theory of change? What dominoes need to fall to get where we want to go? Tracking those dominoes, but also staying open to any surprises or opportunities that pop up. And then recognizing them, bringing it back to the team and saying, okay, this is also what we have to affect our change.
Okay, I am told that because some of you are putting your hands and talking with your hands, that's the audio challenge.
On your hands, please, Charles.
There you go.
We all have to sit on our hands now. Anybody else? Sorry, Charles. Anybody else want to respond to that related to policy? Other thoughts? No?
We don't really do policy
Yeah.
here, so that's a hard one for me to.
It's a tough one, yeah. Here's another one that again gets into some different areas. When we're talking about innovation and enterprise, entrepreneurship, social enterprise, how does that all fit into the discussion? We all know that those are things that we're all thinking about, talking about. What's your perspective on those things as it relates to data and what needs to be done? Anybody, Rhonda?
Well, yeah, I would say that, like what we've been saying, that data informs your decision making about all of that. So whether or not an agency, if an agency is considering having a social enterprise model or pursuing social entrepreneurship, I know when I worked at United Way, there were a number of agencies who were moving in that direction and had to sort of backtrack because they hadn't done the preliminary work of having the data that supports how that might complement the work that they were doing and support their programming. It can't be looked at as just a means of making a lot of money, faster. It's not just about generating a revenue through those models, but it really has to be approached, I think, very intentionally from the standpoint of, does the data even support us doing this? And if so, how will it support our work? So that's what I would say, in terms of that.
So thinking about it in the same kind
Yeah,
of way.
absolutely.
Obviously. Yeah. Again, there's some relationship, obviously, to the data collection and technology and what organizations need, and whether it's hardware or software or training or other kinds of tools. Again, how do organizations need to think about that? Does there have to be large investment in the technology side of it in order to do what you want to do? Again, thinking on that area.
Well, I think, from our perspective, Wyman has recently made some big investments in understanding data and knowledge, to the point that we have a director of knowledge and learning. And her role is really to help us look at all of the data that we're collecting about programs, about process, the process part of it, as well as the outcome part of it. And then the idea is, how do you really bring that into the organization and then also push that out as knowledge, so that it's really usable for not only folks that we collaborate with or in partnership with, but really how do we impact the field with which we're working. And I'm learning more and more that sometimes that requires more complex systems and sometimes it doesn't.
I know, I think a lot of times, as a funder, our funding niche is primarily with churches and small faith-based organizations who, this idea of talking about outcomes and evaluation, we get the deer in the headlight look a lot. And so then you start talking about evaluating what you're doing, and a lot of times we'll get the response, well, I'm going to have to hire this outside evaluator, I'm going to have to do these double-blind studies, and I've got to get this new $50,000 database, and I got to do this and use these formal assessment tools. And my response is, yeah, it can look like that. But good practical evaluation can also look like a simple pre and post test or a simple post test. Start there. That doesn't take necessarily a lot of time. It takes time to develop, again, what are the right questions. That's the hardest part. But just starting simple and small, and building from there. As a funder, we started over the past 5 years trying to track this information ourselves, and came to the point that we realized we as an organization needed to do more investment into this. That's why we created a brand new full-time position to help us do that. But we didn't start out on day one there. It took us time to say, okay, with this capacity, we can do these kinds of evaluation activities. And along the way, we started to say, okay, well, that's answering that, but it's not answering this. So if we want to answer this, what might that look like? And start slowly and build the case and build over time, again, building that culture towards evaluation. But it doesn't have to be the double-blind, scientific, IRB, university studies. Simple pre and post tests can help you start to gather some of that information that can help you start to answer, are we doing good?
I've consulted with multiple nonprofits and foundations, and as I mentioned earlier, what's your source of truth? What's credible? So what I usually advise people to say is, okay, set the level of rigor, set the level of investment you put in, because in a sense that's what we're talking about, tied to whether or not you're going to believe the results. If the results tell you you failed, are you going to believe them given what you've used? So it could be something simple. Again, a bunch of community members, a piece of butcher paper, some markers, and sticky dots. I've done it, it works. It's very low tech, very low investment, all the way to a random controlled trial. There's a broad spectrum. The question is, what are you going to believe? What are your stakeholders going to believe when you're done? Is a post-test enough? Is there a pre-test, post-test enough? Those are the things that you need to think about when you start building that up. The other piece I would say is scale. What is the scale at which you're working? So because I'm doing a lot of work with community, and I'm actually doing work across communities, I need a data system to pull all that information together to make it manageable. I have the data system to make it manageable, not because I need it for analytics or any other purpose. So when you think about what technology you're going to add, you need to think about what is that technology going to provide you? What additional information may it be able to support you with the material you've got? But again, I strongly value the lower the tech, the better. Keep it at the level that the people who are interested in the information believe the results, and you'll do fine.
And that you have the capability,
Correct.
capacity to carry out.
Absolutely.
It's all great to put efforts to outcomes, purchase that software, but if nobody knows how to use it,
Yeah.
that was a wasted investment.
Good point.
Chris, I think this is a question for you, but it relates to the fact that we are using social media more for fundraising purposes and in all kinds of ways. Is that, in your opinion, going to affect the kinds of measurements, the kinds of things that you want to look at then, as it relates to engaging donors and bringing people into your organization?
Right. Well, certainly we look at that as an avenue to reach out to our donors, to connect with them, to give them an opportunity to give through those vehicles. And yes, they are pieces that we evaluate and look at, not just internally, but again, taking that external screen. in finding out, there are some organizations that are really effective with raising money through social media. There are other organizations that aren't, and where do you fit within that line? Again, I think it goes back to, for us, is that return on investment. So, we have only limited financial resources and human resources, and how are we going to deploy those in the best interest of the young people that we serve?
Great. Carolyn, there's a question here related to, in St. Louis, I think you've learned that we've got a number of different groups that are looking at a number of different areas and issues, and we don't have that one sort of collective body that's sort of looking across the board at some of the issues and moving the needles. Can you talk a little bit about how that came to be in Minneapolis? And are there some lessons for us here in St. Louis that we might think about? Or some things you did that we might learn from?
I think the key is
Put her on the spot.
I know. Well,
I didn't mean to
no,
do that.
no, that's all right. No, I mean, this is good. I really think the key is when a group of individuals, regardless of what type of organization you represent, but you are moved and motivated to address a challenge or an issue in the community. That there was some, maybe a study or a statistic, or you became aware of an issue from a credible source of data, from a credible research organization, and you thought, and this is not acceptable. What are we going to do? And you find the coalition of the inspired, as opposed to trying to say they should do this, they should organize this, it should be so-and-so, and maybe it should be. Maybe that group, that organization, that person should be the organization to address that issue, but they're not. So bring the people together who do care, and you will find that leaders emerge and that you can build and create a strategy because you care and are passionate about the issue and the challenge, and you know where you want to go. You know what problem you want to try to address and to solve, and out of that passion and that motivation, you will find the right strategy to move forward. I say to people all the time at Wells Fargo, we reorganize every week whether we need to or not. And so even within a company, a business, you have to say, or you have to think about, the way I think about it is, what needs to happen? What is a goal that we want to accomplish? And I don't care if they're in my division, my department, my business line. Who can help? Who cares about this? Let's bring all those people together and let's strategize on how do we put some strategies in place to make a difference in that issue, to resolve that issue, to change X, Y, Z. And again, you can't wait for things to be structured right, in my experience. You can't. Because then it may never happen.
Good. Final comments from any of our panels? Final thoughts, words, Rhonda?
I would say, going back to that whole idea of building a culture around this, because that's really what it takes. It takes buy-in at the individual level, the organizational level, the community level. You got to have folks who really care about using data in a way that's important. And so, there are some agency leaders who they build consensus and variety of ways. You know, that you try to woo your staff and bribe your staff and incentivize your staff into to buying in. But you know, I believe the fastest way to teach somebody how to dance is to shoot bullets at their feet. So, so just dive in. I mean, seriously, when it comes to the data, I mean, really, you just got to dive in. You can't tiptoe into this. You really, if you care about it, you know, I care about what my agency is trying to accomplish. And, you know I've made some mistakes. I probably could write the book on what not to do when you're starting this project. So I'll have that here next year and do a book signing. But I say dive right in, and there's enough support in this community where you can find the expertise and the people to kind of guide you through it. But the worst thing you could do is to not do anything. You know, some of my staff members were a little resistant because, you know, they were doing, oh, I don't like change. And I said, well, you know, if you think change is hard, you're going to like being obsolete even more. So, you know, you got to do it. You got to do it. So I would say dive in.
Chris.
I'm not exactly sure how to follow that.
Well, Charles is sounding like God over there. Right, exactly. He had to come up with something.
So I keep mine pretty simple. Own it, own the process, understand what you're collecting and why. And then I think the third thing is just really the most important. Make sure that you're articulating it in a way that you can really use it to drive strategy, be that within your departments or organizationally. And always keep your eye on really the end prize, which is advancing your mission.
Right. The key, right?
Yes.
Advancing our missions, yeah.
I think if your goal is to collect data, you've already lost and you've missed the point. Data is the tool to help you know, did I do good, or very crassly, did I do harm with the very people that I'm trying to impact? And that if you focus on that end result, and if you focus on the original passion you had at the beginning of the day of getting involved and trying to make a difference, then data just becomes a natural extension to help me know, yeah, I am actually making the difference beyond the anecdotal stories. And the important part, I think, also is that reflection piece, is what does this data mean? What is this information telling me such that I can use it to impact what I'm doing today and what I'm doing tomorrow? Sorry. That's really, it's not about the data itself. It's about what I'm hoping to achieve and how do I use that data as a tool to help me get to where I'm ultimately wanting to go.
So two things that kind of popped up, and you guys have really magnified one, which is this notion that we really need to think as organizations, and you've heard this a million times, but I'm going to say it one more time. So 1,000,001, I'm measuring it. And that is, we need to think strategically and tactically. Data supports those decision processes. It is not the end-all be-all. It supports it. So you shouldn't be engaging in data that doesn't support those things that are going to be helping you make decisions internally as well as working externally. The other kind of key piece I would say is you're going to kind of know when you've hit the right mark and you're moving in the right direction when somebody on your team says, wait, why didn't we measure that 6 months ago? And you're going to go, oh my God, I forgot. Okay? It's okay. You're going to make mistakes along the way. You're going to miss things along the way. You just add them. You continue the process. So it's not a one creation and we move on. It's iterative, and it's okay to discover new things along the way and add them to your decision process.
Great. Carolyn, any final comment for us before you leave town?
A couple of thoughts. Just what an amazing group of people you have, what an amazing community. The fact that you are all here says so much about how much you care about this community, and you should all be really proud of that and leverage this moment, leverage the work, the research that's been done. Sometimes I find that people are afraid of looking at data and impact and outcomes because they're afraid of what that's going to mean for their organization and for maybe a specific program. And I encourage people to take a deep breath and move forward because your resources are so precious and the lives of the people who you touch and work with are so important, and you need to be implementing programs that do make a difference in the lives of those individuals and those families and the neighborhoods and the community. And if something isn't working, help your team understand that you can still move forward, you can change the program. It oftentimes feels very personally threatening when you're doing evaluation, and I think that there's resistance oftentimes that is somewhat about that. And help your team understand that it doesn't mean that maybe this program, we're going to end this program, but we're going to be morphing it into something that's even more effective and even more powerful in these families' lives and in the neighborhood. So I just, you've got these amazing experts right here in your community, and Amy, and I can't wait to hear more about how you use this forum and this information and how all of you leverage your work. So congratulations, you're amazing.
Thank you. Let's give Carolyn and the panel a big round of applause. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. I want to, before everybody leaves, I want to make sure and thank everybody who's been involved in this effort. Certainly, again, Carolyn, our panelists, everybody who completed our survey, the Gateway Center for Giving, Deb, and the St. Louis Community Foundation, both Amelia, of course, and Mary McMurtry, who's, while she wasn't officially up here this year, was working hard behind the scenes and certainly helped us put this event together. So let's give them another round of applause. I couldn't do this without my team, so to the Rome Group team, and of course especially Alice. Where are you, Alice? You up there someplace? Alice? Alice really is our greatest asset. One other thing, if you're interested in more of this kind of conversation about data, you might want to check out From Accountability to Impact. It's next week, actually. It's on July 24th, and it's being sponsored by the Arts and Education Council and the Nonprofit Services Center, and it's actually funded by our friends at Wells Fargo. And they're having representatives from the Better Business Bureau and from GuideStar who are presenting, and some of the conversation is going to be around data, so you might want to take a look at that. Again, one just final reminder that you can find all of the additional information and the videos and the surveys, et cetera, on our website, on the Gateway Center's website, and on the Community Foundation's website within the next week. We'll get it up there as quickly as we can. It may not be this afternoon, but definitely within the next week. And then finally, we will get an evaluation, everybody. We do this every year. We want to hear from you about what worked, what didn't work. We know we had some audio problems with the mic, so we'll try to figure out that for next time. But really, we appreciate any feedback that you can give us. We want to make this as effective and as helpful for everybody as possible. So thank you for being here. Have a good afternoon, everybody.